I'm going to call to order the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee. Councilwoman Pastor is on the phone, and I'm joined by Vice Mayor Gallegos. So Bill Gates, I believe, will be joining us very soon. First item is the minutes of May 10th.
Move approval of the meeting minutes from May 10th.
Okay, have a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Item 2 is the consent action item for Blue Stake membership. Do I have a motion?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 I'm going to take items 4 and 6 out of order. So Maria, would you like to come up and talk about approval to issue procurement for transit street furniture and bus advertising?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we're glad to be back so that we can provide better clarity than we did at our last meeting on our proposed transit advertising procurement. So one of the questions that came up at the previous meeting was a discussion of why an invitation for bids versus a request for proposals. And so we went to our good friends over at the finance department to make sure that what we had in our heads still made sense to them too. So basically, what it boils down to, an IFB is best when you know what and how you want an item or a service. And an RFP is best when you know what, but not how, or how may vary. So, for instance, in an IFB, the requirements are clearly defined. You know, the selection is more objective. There's typically a limited number of companies that provide the service that meet your qualifications. The process is very straightforward. The invitation for bids itself, the document that we send out and that the proposers bid on, is their actual contract, so that it's signed then immediately after the best proposal is received. With an RFP, the requirements are open. So the selection is much more subjective when based on different or multiple criteria. So I think Councilman Gates brought it up at the last meeting of what did the aviation department do, because they have a lot of advertising over at the airport. So for instance, their scope of work was much larger than ours, and it had a number of factors. And to be honest, in my opinion, based on what we heard from finance, I'm going to read you what their first criteria was. And if it was just those items, they most likely would have gone with an invitation for bids. So they had advertising for floor and wall displays, digital displays on baggage carousels, hotel motel reservation boards, promotional kiosks, etc. But then they added in some of the how, we don't know what or exactly how many. So they added in marketing income programs, including sponsorships, event products rights, licensing, naming rights, and branding. So that would be the subjective factor on who would come in with the best idea of how that might work. So very different advertising programs compared to what we do, where we know exactly what and we know how many. For the minimum qualifications for our bidders that's included in here, we didn't spend a lot of time on this, so I wanted to make sure that I reinforced it. So in the invitation for bid, any proposers must meet these minimum qualifications before they're even evaluated for price. So we want to make sure that they have a minimum of 5 years of experience doing exactly what we want them to do. And they must also have that national and local experience. And where this really comes in handy, of course, is for the large events. So we had Super Bowl and we have the NCAA tournament coming up. And so those really bring in those national advertising options to come back in and bring revenue into our city, as well as additional exposure. And so having that national experience is very important to us. But the local market is the bread and butter for any of the vendors. So having those relationships within our community with our small businesses as well as our local businesses is very important to us. We also require that they have a minimum of 3 contracts of similar size to ours. So where we base that on is typically what is the minimum annual guarantee of those contracts that they have. Is that right in line with ours? Also, they must provide their audited financial statements, which we then review. And we also make sure that they have not been dismissed or terminated for cause. So they must meet those minimum requirements before we'll even evaluate the price. So that gives us a level playing field of qualifications as well as the quality of the companies coming in. So how we structure our contract, as we mentioned, is a minimum annual guarantee. So currently, on the bus side, we have the MAG is set annually to increase by 3%, or it will be 80% of the previous year's payment to the city, whichever is greater. So as you can see, our contracts are slightly different. They were set at different times, and they have slightly different markets. And so that's reflected in those current agreements. On the transit furniture side, the MAG is set annually at 50% of the previous year's net revenues, but it cannot decrease below the original minimum annual guarantee, which was at that point 1 million when we initially awarded the contract. So new opportunities, and this came up at the last meeting also, was how do you address the new things that are coming? So for instance, one of the things that we're looking at is we are currently not in the top 10 markets. The top 10 market is typically, it's based on the region size. So in our case, it would be the Maricopa, the larger Maricopa area, and it's based on population. So Phoenix area, Phoenix metropolitan area is just outside the top 10 advertising market list. With the upcoming census, we may be able to move into, I think we're like at 11 or 12, so we're right there on the edge. So what we would see if we do get into the top 10 is probably a whole different level of opportunities, at least crossing our fingers, because that would bring in different revenue opportunities for our city, as well as ways to showcase our city and our transit system. So some of the things that we've already done, and we did this midway through the contracts, was our shelter wraps with our current transit furniture provider. So this is actually an example of it. So instead of just wrapping the kiosk, the sided panels, we also are wrapping the back of the facility, and it can also be all on the other side of it also. That was something new that our current consultant brought to us as a new opportunity. We currently have a pilot program, but we've included it into the invitation for bids for the next time around. But other technology came up. I think Vice Mayor Gallego, you brought up the signage and the digital signs, and is that an opportunity? And the answer is it absolutely is an opportunity in this. We don't have it fully defined because we don't, I think we'd want to do a full analysis on what is the best way to provide that information to our passengers. But this is one avenue that if this is the best route to include it in, we have that ability through this contract to add in different opportunities. So as I mentioned before, our current annual revenue is about $2 million on our furniture. We have more than 1,100 shelters, benches, and kiosks. So roughly we have 4,000 shelters in Phoenix today. And with that, we have about, let's see, I have my numbers, 30% of them have benches. We will be expanding those in the future as we are adding shade at all of our bus stops, which was our commitment to our voters and to our passengers with Transportation 2050. So we will see additional opportunities that come up with those new shelters, as well as increasing revenue potential in the future. Also on the bus side, our current annual revenue is about $1.5 million, and that's for the 480 buses that we have. That number may increase. We are expecting expansion buses in several years. We haven't been able to expand the system in a while, but with the new revenue stream and the new service we'll be bringing on, we expect to bring in several new buses. So we do have additional revenue. So our current annual revenue is about $1.5 million through our transit advertising program. And so this is just a graph of the last 4 years of our revenues. So currently, the combined programs are bringing into transit more than $3.5 million per year. So we're here today to request your approval on issuing the invitation for bids and recommend to the City Council that we issue that proposal.
Any questions? Comments?
Maybe we do the cards first.
Oh, I guess we should. Marv Kirshner?
Good morning, I'm Marv Kirchler, and I'm with Martin Outdoor. Martin Outdoor handles only benches. I want to be clear on that. We do not do shelters. Martin Outdoor also has the largest contract of benches in the country. We do 7,000 benches in Los Angeles. We install them, we maintain them, and then we sell the advertising. We also operate in the state of Florida, and with the great work that the staff has done as it relates to trying to increase the revenue, many cities, including Los Angeles, have separated the benches from the shelters. It's Martin's position that if the city of Phoenix would look at separating the benches from the shelters, you would have additional revenue, number one, and there's a lot of streets within the city of Phoenix don't have limited right-of-way. A bench would be very appropriate at that site. So I commend the work that the city has done, the staff has done, and would urge that the committee rethink separating out the benches from the shelters. Okay.
Any questions?
I guess, could we get,
Yeah, a response, why?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor Gallego.
Thank
I misstated, so I apologize, sometimes you get nervous. We have 4,000 bus stops, but we only have 1,100 shelters today. As we will be adding in shelters at the rest of them at about 80 per year. So I just wanted to clarify that. But also currently, out of all of our shelters that have benches, there's only about 30% of our total ad shelters that have benches with the advertising on the back. We did not believe with only 30% that provided enough of a market to be able to split that out. At this point in time, based on what we have today and what we plan to implement in the future, we believe we might get a better price by including them all into one package.
would someone who does specialize in benches find a partner who does the rest of the shelter and bid together?
Yes,
that-
we do allow subcontracting or bringing in others into the contract. We don't prohibit that.
Okay, would that give us?
Yeah,
a way-
certainly that's an option. I just wanted to share certainly that with Martin, not only do we sell the advertising on 7,000 benches in Los Angeles, but we also provide the benches and do the maintenance. So the ability for the city to maybe explore this will also reduce the cost of maintenance that the city pays currently.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Reardon?
Morning, my name is Tom Reardon. I'm the municipal liaison for Outfront Media. I just want to make one suggestion that went back to 2 weeks ago. You had granted both the staff the ability to extend the contracts through the end of December. I think you might want to consider doing that through the end of March. And the reason for that is the first quarter in the out-of-home business is always the toughest. And so if we have a situation where our salespeople stop selling as of January 1st, not only is it going to create a tough situation for the first quarter, but a hole that whether it's our company or successors will find they're starting off in a really tough situation. So the first quarter is again, it's real tough, and it creates a sales cycle that our people will actually stop selling and start selling other forms of media that we also have rather than transit.
Okay, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Diane Barker?
Good morning. I'm Diane Barker, and I use transit. And I'm interested in a better transit system and certainly shelters. And there are many people that speak at different meetings, and I think it's good if we combine the information that's brought forward. I know one person who's long-standing in transportation back in the 80s is Blue Crawley. and it's come up that the city wants to light some of the bus shelters, and it's a good idea. Through studies, we've seen that bigger majority of transit patrons are women. And we need to have the bus shelters lit. We need to protect our women in this society. Some of the people, you know, if they don't drive, they wouldn't be protected, you know, by a car, if we can say that, because there are a lot of crashes. But I think it's good to know that somebody's thinking. I think it came out of the Phoenix Commission. That is, now they're talking about when you put a bus shelter in, put it near as close to a light pole, because the solar that we're putting in, which I'm very much for, unfortunately the batteries and the solar panels aren't withstanding time. The solar panels are being stolen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Motion?
Move approval of staff's recommendation to issue the transit street furniture and bus advertising procurement.
Second.
Okay. Councilwoman Pastor, did you want to make any comments?
No, I'm fine.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Item 6, which is the Regional Fare Collection System update.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Joe Bauer, Acting Deputy Director, will be joining me, and we'll be tag teaming this presentation. But I got to say that I'm really excited about talking about this. As we were going through the Transportation 2050, getting feedback from our customers, our passengers, and to be honest, from people who've never ridden the system, but what they envision for the system were the things that we're talking about today. And these are certainly not new things, which is why I think it was the #1 topic that they talked about, is they felt we were lagging behind on the different opportunity or different options for paying for your bus fares, bus and light rail fares. So we're excited to talk about where we are with researching this and what our next steps will be. So we started in 2007 with the system, our current fare collection system, and we are about midway through, if not towards the latter end of the life expectancy of all of the equipment. So what we do know is that we have to make some decisions pretty soon because it takes a while to go through a new procurement for the fare collection system. So what we need to do is really look at the existing system, the equipment, the databases, all of the back end that supports our fare collection system, and make some decisions on, can it be extended and still meet our desire for smart card technology, mobile phone technology, et cetera, or are we better off waiting till the end of the life cycle and going out and including those as part of the bids? So in our current system, we have cash we accept. We have the Platinum card. So if Ray is going to have show and tell, I need show and tell. So we have our Platinum cards, which are actually a smart card. And we also have our magnetic stripe that people buy on the bus and light rail fares and dip it or tap it. Joe, you want to talk about the progress we're making with the study?
Sure. Thank you, Maria. Good morning. So our fare collection system, as we know, is a regional system. So that means we're actively involved with Valley Metro and our partnering cities in this. And for about the last year and a half, the region has focused on assessing the fare collection system and trying to develop alternatives or goals on how we want to move forward, how we want to address the public's desire to have more technology, and how we incorporate that into our existing system or how we expand it. So there's been numerous groups. We have a regional fare working group that studies this. It's made up of our regional partners. That team pretty much, they looked at options, what our peer cities are doing, where we're at compared to them. And you really got a mixed bag of where other cities are. Some put their eggs all in one basket, maybe with mobile ticketing or reloadable smart cards, and some have a mix of that. So out of the phase 1 came goals, And then phase two, which we are in now and continuing to work on, we're refining those goals. And the fair technology industry likes to call it a concept of operations, which really is defining in detail our path forward. So our regional goals, we want to look at ways to provide more options for our riders using technology. But when we add technology, we don't want to lose the integrity of our data. We would like to enhance it and expand it. And then we want to control more the distribution of our fares. So if you have mobile ticketing or a reloadable smart card, there's credit card charges, there's the back end charging the individual, or if they add store value, then they can work off of, add $20 at whenever they want, that type of thing. We want to strengthen our reduced fare program. Right now, our reduced fare program is easily abused. The refereeing of who can get a reduced fare card is difficult, to say the least. And then also, as we move forward, we want to look at the technology and make sure our enforcement of fares can still occur. We don't want to get our technology ahead of the capability to enforce the correct fares. So for our region, our goals are to improve the reduced fare program. We want to go to a formal registration of reduced fare individuals, whether you're under 18 as a youth, over 65, or use Medicare card as an acceptable form of a reduced fare, or if you're disabled. So we have to address all those and the ability for those people to register, so that would be a big marketing outreach effort. We want to look at reloadable smart cards, which would, as Maria showed you, our smart card now is company-based. We want to hopefully expand that to the individual, where you can load it online at a TVM or at a resale outlet. And then mobile ticketing, which we will have to decide as we go through our refinement of our goals, whether we can do all fare types or we have to limit that. And it may be something that we pilot to get everybody introduced to it and see how the system works.
Our phase one goals are really focused on the customer. So as Joe mentioned, it is very easy right now to get a reduced fare pass. When we compare ourselves to other cities on the reduced fare pass usage, we're at approximately 40% or higher of all passes sold are reduced fare, compared to probably the national average is closer to 20%. So finding a very easy, reasonable way for our passengers who are eligible for those reduced fares to be able to get an ID card, which then they can use, whether it's on a smart card in the future, whether it's mobile ticketing, or whether it's just to show proof of a mag stripe or a cash sale that they have those tickets, those cards to be able to prove it. We believe this will be a better one of our major improvements. And that's really one of our phase one goals with to implement as soon as possible. The second one, and I'm sure Councilman Gates is going to be very pleased to hear this, is the phone, the mobile phone technology. So he's been asking me about this for about 2 years. And so I am so sorry, Councilman, that it's taken us 2 years. But we believe that mobile ticketing is also something that we can implement as one of our phase one goals. So our desire is to get the concept of operations with Valley Metro and our regional partner cities together and start bringing that through for the reviews of the committees on what exactly those phases are. We will come back to the subcommittee, most likely in the early fall, to share more of that information as it's better defined, because we are still in that information collection mode. And then get your approval, and ideally we are ready to issue a request for qualifications through Valley Metro for those phase one options after the first of the year. And that could mean that implementation could be as soon as 18 months or less. The smart card, reloadable smart cards, we believe will take slightly longer. So we're going to include that in, most likely in phase one, but it may be something that stretches into phase two because it does require touching every single fare box, every single ticket vending machine, retail outlets. It's a much bigger process. And we don't want to slow down the other options while we also go forward with the smart card technology. So we're very pleased with where we are. We believe this is meeting what our passengers and our community has been asking for, and Councilman Gates has been asking me for. And we're open for any questions you may have on our next steps.
Maria, what do you estimate the cost will be?
Madam Chair, we are still in the process of defining that. I do not even have a number yet. Our goal really is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, was we need to make sure that whatever we do is either not a throwaway when we do have to replace the fare collection system as a whole, or it's a small, very small amount if it doesn't roll right into what happens next with the fare collection system. So we are currently in the definition phase of what that cost would be, and we will be bringing that back to you in the fall.
And how would that be paid? City of Phoenix, RPTA, combination?
It is a regional cost that would be shared amongst all of the partner cities, as well as Valley Metro. Typically, our cost is paid through, pardon me, through regional and federal funds.
Vice Mayor?
The relationship we have with Talking Stick Resort Arena, I think, has been very successful. So people really enjoy the ability to use their ticket to a Suns game or something else and ride the rail. Will we have the opportunity to do more partnerships? You could see like a Phoenix Pass someday that might include light rail and passes to all of the great museums that are along the light rail or something. So could we move towards some of those more innovative marketing partnerships?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor Gallego, absolutely. I mean, we are completely open to those opportunities. We see the Talking Stick Arena as a huge success, not only for our passengers. We think it increases their usage of the system, as well as it makes loading the trains very easy, as well as the buses. And it is definitely available for, we could look at partners, like you said, with arts, et cetera. One of the other things that we've started talking about, and we're in very early stages, but we are talking to the Grid Bike folks. And wouldn't it be nice if you had a monthly pass that was also good for the bike program too, so that you could use both as your first and last mile? Again, part of that requires more saturation of the market with the Grid Bikes, but I believe we'll be there at some point. They now have Grid Bikes in Mesa. They're finalizing their contract in Tempe. So I think that would be a great opportunity to be able to provide that as one pass provides both of the systems. The opportunities really are endless. It really is a will from the folks, as well as marketing to them and selling them on the benefits. One of the other things that we're talking about, and I'm jumping ahead, but these opportunities with the large events in downtown Phoenix, between the Super Bowl and next coming up with the Final Four. We're currently working on the music festival portion of the Final Four. And the location of it is maybe at Hance Park. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how do we get people from downtown to Hance Park? It's only a little over a mile, but most people, may not want to walk that. Can we do a free fare zone? Now, granted, free fare means somebody else is paying for that, but to all of the attendees of the NCAA, they would have their pass, their ticket, whatever it is their fare on the train. So those opportunities are definitely going to continue to come up. We're open to them. We think this is a very exciting way to get people on the system. And really, the sky's the limit.
Fabulous. And then one more question. One of the things that I'm very glad we're doing, it's sort of related to this topic, is making sure we have an accessible pay station at every light rail stop. Could we get an update on making sure that each stop has a station that's at an appropriate height for individuals using mobility aids, such as wheelchairs?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor Gallego, why don't we come back at a future meeting and give you the status of that? I do know that approximately a third of the ticket vending machines have been completed, but we can come back with a report on
Fabulous.
that.
Thank you.
Councilman Gates?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great news on the mobile ticketing. I guess my one just reaction hearing this about the smart cards is that, I don't know, it sounds like there's a lot of investment involved there. seems like it might be showing my ignorance about this, but it just seems like it'd be more efficient to just kind of jump over the smart card and go to the mobile device, use people's devices that most everyone has moving forward. So just one thing to think about. And we've seen a lot of that's been adopted by a lot of the airlines. A lot of people are using the mobile ticketing now, and so happy to see that we're moving forward. Just wondering kind of what the best practices or where the other metro areas are going. And the smart card, it just sounds like one more thing that we can lose. And we've all got these. I know it's like a broken record, but I got to do it one last time, right? Why not just move more towards the mobile technology?
So, Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, what we're hearing from our consultant, CH2M, is that you do see a mixed bag. So most of the cities have gone towards smart cards first. Mobile technology is coming up second, and it's newer. However, the usage on the mobile ticketing tends to be less in those communities. So I think what I heard yesterday was 20% of all passengers in San Antonio or Austin are using the mobile ticketing piece of it, whereas they're using the smart cards much more because it doesn't require the phones. Valley Metro did do a survey this past year that asked our passengers on, do you have a smartphone? 73% of our passengers do have a smartphone, but what we didn't ask was how many of them have unlimited data in order to do that, because that's another consideration. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are not eliminating populations or providing, yes, with our Title VI requirements. So that is definitely one of the factors that we consider. Part of it will be with the concept of operations when we're getting ready on both of them is that cost. So as I mentioned, we want to make sure that whatever we do is cost effective and is buildable onto the next system.
And so is there a possibility to look at Wi-Fi at the light rail stations and Wi-Fi on the buses that would address the issue of data?
Yes. And in fact, Valley Metro is currently in a partnership with Cox Communication, and they are almost, I believe they're almost complete in putting Wi-Fi at all of the stations. I don't know that they have that on all of the vehicles yet. We will be coming forward to council in the fall with our CAD AVL, Computer Aided Dispatch Vehicle Locator System bid award. And what that does, it tells us where all the buses and trains are, but what it will also allow us to do is to easily add in Wi-Fi onto all of the systems in the future. So we'll see those go hand in hand as an opportunity. We continue to progress, and we see these options, and we just need to be flexible and nimble and able to take advantage of them.
Great. And Madam Chair, just one last thing, since you mentioned Grid Bikes, I have to get it in, a plug for Grid Bikes at 19th Avenue and Dunlap and get those over to Sunny Slope. So thank you.
Councilwoman Pastor, do you have any questions?
I do not.
We have one card. Diane? Dee?
Thank you, Councilman Williams. Let's talk about truth and myth. And our transit director, I know, goes to some of the Valley Metro meetings. And she also attends, and I think she stays up to date, on the Phoenix Commission. At one of the meetings, she mentioned that it's reported people aren't paying for their fare on light rail. However, our existing CEO claims that 40%, and this is all in writing of what I'm speaking of, for 40% of the operating costs come from the fare box for light rail, where it's only 25% for buses. Buses carry the majority of the riders. Light rail is 10%. Where we're going with this, people get on and off of light rail. When an inspector comes, they jump off. And there are several that do that. We have sold light rail to ASU and even our sports facilities at a fraction of the cost, less maybe 23%. So let's get rid of this idea that the light rail is carrying more people and paying more money into operations. And why I am talking about this is that it's not the reduced fare person. We want persons of disabilities and seniors who deserve it to go there. But what we need to look at is maybe we need to make it free for everybody and the taxpayer. It slows the system down in paying for it, because basically we have light rail that is claiming, and their auditor can't make any opinion on the internal controls. It's up to Valley Metro, and we already know that Valley Metro has had a problem being accurate reporting. And so the thing about it is, if you really know and believe that your policies are helping people use the system, that's where we should go. We need better customer service. We need models to show it can happen. We need to create systems that have enough shade. And as far as bringing people to Hance Park, there is a light rail that you can do it. Maybe you want a tram also to make a circular downtown, and in the long-range future, we really should have petro vehicles out of the center of the city, and our light rail, and people come in, walk, bicycle, and like that, because air quality now is paramount, and our transportation systems need to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? This is for information, correct? Okay. I thank you very much. Appreciate it. We will now go to item 3, which is the 2017 pavement maintenance projects.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Ray Dovalina from Street Transportation is here along with Ruben Lawley.
Show and tell.
And they've brought some props along with them to show. Yeah. So unfortunately, you're not here, Councilwoman Pastor, to see the props. So we'll do our best to describe it for you so you can picture it in your mind.
Thank you, Mayor. Madam Chair and subcommittee members, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to address this item. This item was actually heard at the Citizens Transportation Commission. They did recommend it to bring it to this subcommittee. Just to start off, I'm going to pass around this. It looks like coffee grinds, but it's not. It's actually rubberized. It's tires that are been grinded down to basically just like pellets or small. Like sand, it looks like sand. But, so back in the history of City of Phoenix, and some of you are aware of this, but in the late 70s, early 80s, the city was pioneering sustainability on how do we recycle certain things. And they looked at basically the tires to be integrated into our asphalt program. And so that was one of the first things that we looked at way back when, our predecessors that worked on this, and came up with rubberized asphalt. And just wanted to show you what actually is grinded down from a tire, and then that is used as a material with our asphalt pavement. And so with that, I'm going to have Ruben kind of go through the presentation, and it's again, this is for the fiscal year 2017, our Transportation 2050 funding for our pavement program.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm excited to present to you our proposed project for 2017 T2050 maintenance program. We are able to now do a comprehensive pavement treatment instead of just doing overlays. So the program this time, instead of doing only about 20 miles, we're able to do about 81 miles when we do comprehensive maintenance treatment. So what we have, so we have the overlays, which cost us about $880,000 per mile, and microsurfacing, microsurfacing is this material here. This is an old one, it's a little dirty, but it looks nicer than that when it's new.
It's a little bit darker as
Yeah.
well. The new one is a little bit darker.
And this is what the overlay looks like.
The top portion is the overlay, and this is the older portion of it.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's a micro seal.
That's the micro seal.
Yeah, that's a micro seal.
Micro seal
That first
material.
one.
And that's basically sand and asphalt mixed together to preserve pavement. So the overlay is good for roads that are in fair to poor condition. So, you know, when complaints start coming, then it's time to do overlay. And that's what hopefully our program will help us reduce. Microsurfacing, also pavements that are in fair condition.
What's this?
This is the original pavement. This is the original pavement before it starts going bad, and then we put the overlay on top of it. It's the same, but the bottom one does not have rubber in it.
Okay, let me ask you, is this the stuff I see, the gravel?
Madam Chair, it could look like gravel, but it's some of it is the aggregates that are inside the asphalt, because the structural aspect of the pavement is actually the aggregate. And so what you'll see sometimes, if it's failing, you'll see the rocks that are inside the pavement.
Because the rocks come to the surface.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't know if we want to show that other one, but
sorry to interrupt.
no, that's okay.
Yeah, this one is quite heavy, but this shows a pavement treatment overlay over a crack.
Yeah, and so typically that crack is where we would do a crack seal before that. And so this wouldn't be open like that, like a void like this. But this is the same thing as that last one. It would have the existing, and then you would have that rubber on top.
The importance of crack seal is that if you don't crack seal, that crack will come through the overlay easily, call it reflective, to reflect through, so.
It's exercise class. Oh, it is.
It's pretty heavy.
Oh, yeah, it is heavy.
Yeah.
You want to slide it down? Probably scratch the table.
So we don't have a treatment, we don't have an example of the TRMSS or the crack seal. Obviously, those are the fillers that would go into those cracks.
Yeah, the TRMSS and crack seal are meant to keep good pavement in good condition. If you don't do that, the condition drops very fast. So the fact that we're able to do 11 more miles of microsurface TRMSS, and this over here, so for every 1 mile of overlay you do, you can do 2.2 miles of microsurfacing and 11 miles of TRMSS and 20 miles of crack seal. So you can do a lot to keep good roads in good condition. With the comprehensive overlay program, we compare it to just doing overlays over a 62-year cycle. 62-year cycle, because per our overlay, our comprehensive program, we would need to do the overlay every 63 years. So the cycle ends at 62. So we compare that against doing just overlays. We'll see that we have a cost saving of about $362,000 per mile of roadway. Considering the fact that Phoenix has about 5,000 miles, this is a comprehensive saving. If we do overlay only, we would need to overlay the street every 41 years. And that every year we'll only be able to treat, or per our budgets that we have, if we only do overlays, we will only be able to overlay 2.5% of the road, which means compared to the comprehensive system, which would treat about 10% of the roadway, we'll have about 7.5% hanging out there. With overlay only, we can only treat every 41 years, and which means when you treat the pavement today, you can't do anything to it for 41 years. So if it keeps going bad, you just have to wait for 41 years. And pavements last about 20 to 30 years, so you'll be looking at very poor pavements all over the network. If we do a comprehensive treatment, we'll be able to do a treatment every 10 years. In the 10 years, most of those treatments are pavements that are already in good condition. So, the complaints will go down, and we'll have a good-looking network.
So the key with this is that with our program, because of the different treatments that we're going to have, we're going to be touching every road within 10 years, and that's the goal that we're trying to do. Not just put it for overlays, because the issue would be that we wouldn't be touching that road until 41 years with the budget that we have.
So with the comprehensive treatment, we are able to come up with this program, proposing it to to you, Madam Chair, and members of the subcommittee. We will be able to do 28 miles approximately of crack seal, costing us about over $900,000. The overlays we can only do 50 miles with about $9 million. It's about 64% of the entire budget. And microsurfacing, we can do 13 miles. And then TRMSS, we can do 25 miles at significantly lower, cost. So overall, we can treat 81 miles of roadway. If we converted all these treatments into overlay, we can only do 25 miles total. So, the comprehensive treatment helps us a lot, to treat our entire network and taking care of pavements at different states of their condition. So,
Madam Chair.
Councilman?
Just a question on these terms here, because you use the polymer modified microseal terminology. So that is the micro, is that all
Yes,
the
sir.
microseals?
Yes.
Or when we see PMM on these charts, are there other microseals that aren't PMM?
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, yes, there's different treatments for different types of roads. So these are these ones that Ruben has shown up in the presentation. These are directly related to our arterials, major arterials, and major streets. The other ones, and can you explain the other ones? Or
Yes, we have the TRMSS, a tire rubber modified surface sealant. So it seals the surface of a good road to prevent moisture from penetrating so that the road will stay in good condition. We have a PMM, which is polymer modified master seal, which we typically use for local streets. That treatment turns your street really, really dark, really nice, and also for pavements that are in good condition. And then the microsurfacing, our microsurfacing that we are using is polymer modified to enhance the performance of the microsurface. And the crack seals, all our crack seals have polymer in it. So that's the difference. The PMM is for local street, that's why we didn't present it over here. Because this is for the arterial program, which the T2050 covers.
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, just for clarification, on your attachment that you have, we actually are showing both the Transportation 2050 funding that's directly related to the arterials and major streets, but also the non-T2050, so the rest of the program that we have for FY17.
Okay, so just a question like on here, I'm looking at some of the District 3 projects. So Greenway Road from 20th Street to Cave Creek, it says PMM. So,
That's a polymer.
Polymer modified.
okay, I thought you said that was for local streets. No, that's used on arterials as well?
Let me see.
See here.
Yeah, it's on page 25, or at least that's.
Councilman, we do have some of them that are in the minor arterials, and some of them that are considered with this type of treatment. So I'm looking at this one right here. All these streets here.
Yes.
This is the PMM.
Oh, which project is that?
Greenway.
So, yeah, so like my question is on page 25, so we have Greenway Road is PMM, but then,
No, it's a quarter section.
Yes, yeah.
It's a quarter section.
So Councilman, it's a quarter section, sorry. It's a quarter section. It's basically we take from the major streets, and we take that quarter section, and it's that local streets that are within that quarter section map.
got
Sorry.
it. Okay, perfect. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
So just finishing off this presentation, we have this as a recommendation for moving forward for consideration for the approval of this concept. Do you have anything else? This just shows a map of the area of both the local streets and then the major streets, showing you the difference between the 2017 HERF that we use, the AHER funding that we have, and then the 2017 T2050 program that we have. And those are the differences there on this map.
Right. I know for years, we haven't been able to do very much maintenance. Do you have a handle on how many streets actually need resurfacing? I mean, this looks like a lot, but I have a feeling it's a drop in the bucket.
Madam Chair, that's a great question. First of all, there's a two-part answer to that. First of all, we're, with this additional funding that we're getting from T2050, as we've talked before, our focus on the continuing funding that we get from the gas state share revenues, all of those funds are going to get directed to the locals and collectors, minor collectors. The goal with this funding that we're adding is to enhance our arterial major streets and address that. And so, for just example, for the funding purposes, we're actually doing more than 60% more of what we currently had been doing up until last year. So 60% more funding is being allocated for the major streets, actually as compared to the previous program, because right now, up until last year, and we continue to do the HERF funding, it's about $20 to $22 million. So it's about 60% more money that we're infusing into the program. With regards to the number of streets, can you talk about Ruben, can you talk about the PCI, the Pavement Condition Index rating, and how many roads up until last year we had in poor or bad condition?
Yeah, I think before we went to we did the T2050, I think we had about 20% of our road network that's considered in poor condition.
And it was climbing. Every year was climbing. It was getting up to, more than 25% across the whole city.
Yes, and we are hoping that with the new treatment that we are doing, with our new comprehensive pavement management or pavement preservation programming, we can reverse that trend over time. So, roads always would need treatment. So how much do you need? How fast how often should you do it? Depends on the budget. And we think that with the funding we have, being able to treat a street every 10 years would keep the good roads in good condition, and then we'll be able to treat the ones that are really bad over time.
I guess I understand, once you get them there, you're going to try to keep them up to 10 years. But how do you get that far? Because when we were out campaigning for 2050, how many total dollars did you say? Wasn't it $1 billion worth of projects?
Close to $1 billion. For the funding that we're getting for this through the T2050 program, it's about 2.3 overall for streets.
Right.
And of that portion, about 45% of that funding is directly for the pavement maintenance for this program, directly for the arterials and major streets.
But I thought you estimated a much higher
Oh,
cost.
yeah, I'm sorry,
or
yes,
need
yes. Yeah, the
out there.
need overall, we're looking at, overall from the Street Transportation Department, it's about $7 billion. Of that, there's about 1.7 on just drainage, and then the rest of it is all the pavement, all the infrastructure that we need to add, and reconstruction of things. So of that portion, I believe there was about 2.2 billion. Okay, 2.2 billion. So we're only actually half of what we needed, because we're getting about a little bit less than $1 billion overall in the next 35 years to address. So yes, I mean, we are not achieving what we need, but this is a big turn that we're doing right now to add to this program and to help us bring down that cycle that we had up until last year, and we're going to be progressing. We had a 62 to 65 year cycle. We're trying to bring that down to a more manageable 35, 40 year cycle on the major streets and major collectors. So that's our goal, to try to reduce that as our program grows for the next 35 years.
And I understand that you are doing the best that you can with what you have, which is insufficient, if I understand what you just said to me.
Yes.
So, question, or Vice Mayor?
First of all, thank you to Chairwoman Williams, who's really been the leader on the war on potholes in Phoenix. So congratulations. We have so many different weapons. Could we go back one slide to the map? I think we sent a question to your office, but just in particular, the Levine area doesn't seem to have a lot of activity, and they have some roads that have been beat up by construction and storms pretty badly.
Madam Chair and Vice Mayor, every year, as we've talked about, every year we try to do a cycle. You're only seeing a snapshot for this coming fiscal year for FY17. So we're actually, we have a 2-year to 3-year program, and so there might have been some in this past year that we had for, a little bit more in Levine. And then also we're looking at for next FY 18 and 19. So our goal is to try to make sure that, number one, we're treating the roads that need the treatments, but also there's the aspect of trying to spread the work around to make sure that we're hitting all the areas appropriately across the whole city. Anything to add?
Yeah, so because from what we've said, these areas that you see now will not come up for another 10 years. So it will be going, so it's a cycle that will be moving all over the city based on the need right now. So if any area is not showing much treatment now, it's not because it's being neglected, it's because based on the need assessment today, it doesn't require treatment. But over a 10-year cycle, it will show. It will show.
Thank you.
Councilman Gates?
Thank you, Chairman. And Mr. Lawley, good to see you again.
Yes, sir. Good to see you too.
For those who aren't regular watchers of Gateway to Phoenix, I had Mr. Lawley on my show, and we did a ride along in the pavement maintenance van. So thank you. That was, the police have nothing on that one. Talk about excitement. So thank you. I really do appreciate
You're welcome.
you doing that. So a couple questions. One, my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, there was an increase in AHR funding in the budget, the state budget that was just passed. Is that? I think I read that somewhere. So maybe we can check on that, and if there is, would be interested in seeing. I assume that would hit us pretty immediately, and where that could be put to best work. Also, the Vice Mayor referenced District 7 not having a lot of projects, and of course I've spoken at length about my views on how District 3 has been treated in this particular fiscal year that we're working on here right now. So just to clarify, because we had something that came through the council recently, was that just T2050 projects only? And now we're going back through with the AHR projects. Is that?
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, yes, when we did this last recent one, it was for FY16, and it was only the T2050 program. We already had programmed the entire FY16.
Okay, so that was those were just projects to get done before the end of June? This fiscal year?
The end of this fiscal year. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I think that, and I won't even, I was accused of being parochial by someone when we came to the council level last time about this, so I won't even make it about district versus district. But I just, I think you mentioned when you start to get complaints, that's when you have a problem. And we have had numerous complaints, and I've observed it, and lots of District 3 residents have observed the poor pavement quality on Thunderbird Road from 7th Street to 19th Avenue. And frankly, again, to me, I'm not the expert, you guys are, but it seems in much worse condition than several of the overlay projects that are listed here within District 3 itself. So, I feel like I've got to make a run for this because it really is a real concern to our residents in Moon Valley and those who go through Moon Valley. So I did vote against the projects in I guess it would have been the end of fiscal year 16, but I'm willing to vote in favor of this item, but I'm going to throw a motion on the table. So I would support staff's recommendation on this with the addition of an overlay from Thunderbird Road from 7th Street to 19th Avenue in fiscal year 2017 or as soon as practicable in the opinion of Street Transportation Department.
I have to mention that you stopped too soon.
Oh, did
Yes, you did. You should have gone to 35th Avenue.
Okay, I can. I'm happy to do that. Could certainly add that to 35th Avenue.
I mean, even our city manager drives that street and complains to me how bad it is.
He complains to you?
Yeah.
No better evidence than Mr. Zerker's viewpoint. Yeah, I will amend my motion then to 7th Street to 35th Avenue.
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, thank you for that comment. I'm sorry to, one of the issues that we have is if we add something, something's gotta change as well. So we can certainly look at that. I know we've talked about it, Councilman, and we can certainly analyze that to see how we can incorporate that.
Thank you.
And the other piece of that is, as you mentioned, the possibility of increased AHRP funds, or if there are other resources available, we can look at
Look
directing
that,
those to
yeah.
that segment of Thunderbird Road.
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
So right now, it's sort of a cost neutral, we'll just redistribute money motion.
Yes, it does not, that's correct.
Second.
Okay. Councilwoman Pastor?
Yeah, I do have a question, and it's really for our viewers to understand how these roads are chosen. Because I do agree with Councilman Gates and Councilman Williams and Councilman Gallego that there are probably other streets that we could probably identify that we feel are more at need than some that are identified on this chart. And so I'm just curious of how that gets, and how long has this, I guess, when's the last time we evaluated the streets?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, what we do every year, and it's a 2 to 3 year cycle, we go through, we have a pavement van that was mentioned by Councilman Gates, and that we travel all of our streets, the 4,800 miles of streets that we have, and we use that as information to gather based on what what's the appearance of what's happening with the road system. In addition, we look at what's going on with different projects, different coordination efforts that we're doing with other utility companies to see how we can navigate trying to address the worst conditions with the applicable type of treatments to all those streets. So we kind of go through that analysis every year, and we've been doing it for quite some time, for several years.
And I think in addition, you told me, because we're going to put it on all the new water lines, you were coordinating with that department also?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair.
We do have a card, Dee Dee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I enjoyed this lively conversation. I was going to say, Councilman Gates, that was bumpy ride was more than a ping in one, right? A hole in one. Yeah. In regards to where you're going, to put this repavement, and we know that the city of Phoenix is bigger square miles than LA, someplace where I just got back from. And the thing is that I want to see where in these arterials that we could also entice people through customer service, price. I know you brought up Councilman Williams to me several times, on trying to show directions if you're going to go by transit or automobile to different destinations or restaurants, that it's going to cost money. I think that you can do better customer service to get the information out how to use the systems, and now you have the 19th Street rail that you want people to use, but you have more accidents over in your area. I understand 35th and 43rd, and it costs a lot of money, and probably replacing, streets and infrastructure. So my point is we need an outreach, we need affordable customer service to get to people that are in that area, to show them how that they can reasonably connect, and even in the heat, to transit.
Thank you. Well, we have a motion, we have a second. Any further comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
We're going to go to street pavement cuts.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, obviously we spent considerable time talking about the needed investment for maintaining the pavement throughout the city. But in a very, very related subject, another source of frustration can be for our residents when streets are cut into, so that utilities can be accessed under the streets for repair work or for relocation work. So sometimes that can be an inconvenience for when the work is being done as a temporary lane closures. But if the inconvenience can actually go on for much longer if the street cut is patched insufficiently, if it fails and begins to sink or dip or shift. So in this case, the drivers and riders experience bumps and dips that are not supposed to be there, even on a street that otherwise has a decent pavement condition. You may have a case where the road patch where a cut was made creates a problem. So it is important to point out, though, that those street cuts to access those utilities are important. Those utilities are for water and for power and for communication lines throughout the city that are very important to a healthy and livable city. At the same time, the city works hard to coordinate with those utilities to make sure that for any scheduled work that's going to be done on the street side and on the utility side, that those are coordinated so that we're not making cuts right after new pavement goes in. But sometimes that's not always the case that we can coordinate. Sometimes there are emergencies or repairs that need to be done that are not expected. And so we still have some work to do. There are things that we can do to improve ways to protect our investment in maintenance. And that's really what we're here today on this item to talk about, is looking at ways to make that better, to improve the coordination, and look at some other options to do that. This is just to open the discussion, a discussion that may be taking place over the next several months. But that's what Ray and Keeney, our city engineer, and Brianna Velez, our engineering supervisor in streets, are here to talk to you about today.
Okay.
Thank you, Mario. And just to start off, Madam Chair and subcommittee members, thank you for this opportunity. Again, as Mario mentioned, our investment and our pavement is critical. And how do we move forward to make sure that we preserve that investment for the future and for all the residents that are using these roads? So with that, I'll have Keeney start off the presentation.
Thanks, Ray. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, the main thing we're here to talk about is to give you some information, give you information about what we do today, give you information about something that we see as a potential issue that we probably have to have a dialogue and have a conversation about how we move forward with. But we want to lay a little bit of information in front of you so you understand exactly what we're doing today and what we potentially may be able to do in the future dealing with street pavement cuts, especially in the light of the item you just heard about Transportation 2050 and the efforts we're doing for pavement maintenance. One of the complaints we hear through our dispatch office, also through your offices as well, is when we go out and do a nice treatment to a roadway and we hear, well, somebody just came back and cut into it. And so there's, like as Mario mentioned, there's various reasons. Some of them urgent emergency based, some of them other reasons. But we do our best to coordinate in those kind of situations, and we want to do our best to be able to protect the investment that the Phoenix taxpayers are making in the street, and we're executing through these different projects, and especially with T2050, obviously, an additional double down of the investment we're doing in maintaining our streets. So how can we do better in this area, and what are we doing currently? So we have coordination efforts that we do. We work with these different utility providers, including our City of Phoenix Water Services departments as well, and through different means. They're in the roadway through licenses, typically, and franchise agreements that they have the ability to use our right-of-way. We have a process through Brianna's utility coordination section in our design and construction management group to go through permits and inspections. So anytime anybody wants to come in the right-of-way, either to build something new or also to go back and maintain or upgrade some existing facility in the right-of-way, they come to Brianna's group to get a permit, and then Brianna's group also does inspections to make sure that the cut is done appropriately and is done per City of Phoenix standards, and to make sure that when it's done, it has the best ability to be able to maintain its integrity for the life of that cut. So when we're talking about coordination with these different utility providers and utility companies, we have different ways that we do that. Brianna's group, we meet quarterly with some utility companies, sometimes a little twice a year we meet with them, but we have frequent communication on all these different issues with these utility companies. And so we have different tools to be able to provide that coordination. Obviously, when we're talking about silo busting and we're trying to do better coordination, you can always do more. But what I would say, that is always something that we're always trying to do and always trying to do well. But obviously, there's always room for improvement when you talk about coordination. So why do we permit and inspect? And I think the first thing is to protect the public. When they're out doing a cut in a roadway, we want to make sure it's done safely. We've got traveling public, whether it's pedestrians or vehicles traveling around there, so we want to make sure that's done appropriately. But also to protect the investment. So when they're done with it, how does it look? How does it feel? How does it maintain over several years or the life of the pavement? So we want to make sure that's done adequately. And also, the reason why we do this is to make sure we keep track of those cuts throughout the pavements. And the next slide is going to tell you a little bit more what we're talking about and the number of cuts. So if you're looking at just calendar 2015 alone, 2015 alone, we had nearly 7,500 pavement cuts that went through Brianna's utility coordination section. And so if you look at the two utility providers that had the most cuts, it was Cox and our City of Phoenix Water Services Department. So when we go through that, that is a lot of coordination aspect that happens with each one of those nearly 7,500 cuts. And with those, if you put those in perspective,
Madam Chair, just a question on the pavement cuts on water services. I mean, every time they go out to fix a leak, does that constitute a pavement cut, or are these more major projects?
yes, Council. Yeah.
So it is every time they go out. So that's part. I mean, any idea how many of those are just sort of your typical of the water services numbers, or just a typical water leak?
At this time, we can get the information
Okay.
back to you on that one.
Thanks.
And if you put that number into perspective, the 7,500 cuts per year, and you're looking at nearly 5,000 miles of street, so you're having more than one cut per mile of city street per year. So that kind of puts it into perspective of what kind of issue we're dealing with. And so those, as we mentioned, those cuts, some of them, as you mentioned, may be emergency-based cuts that they're dealing with. So they are necessary, but we want to make sure we coordinate as best we can in how those are done. So if you look at just the dynamics of a pavement cut, even if you go and you do it the most correct fashion, you go and cut your trench, you protect that trench with shoring, and you go back and backfill that trench and put it and compact it and make sure it puts back for the right pavement on top and everything like that. You still have, as the diagram on your left shows, that you have a zone of influence outside that cut, where the soil that has been compacted in there has now that pressure is lessened in there. So you can have some reduction in the compaction that may happen in there, and some impacts there that may happen after the cut's put back in. That's where you have sometimes some settling and some differential settlement in a cut on the outside of that cut later on. And so that would cause that unevenness in the roadway and the dips that may occur later on. So even, like I said, even if it's done perfect, it's still, these cuts do have a tendency to reduce the pavement life, and there's studies that be able to show that as well. So if you look at coordination gets us so far, but there's also protections within the city code and the city ordinance on how we deal with these cuts when we're working with the utility providers, and how do we protect our investment. Right now, essentially when somebody comes in after we've paved a street or we've improved a street, there's a 30-month window where there's a surcharge fee that's applied if somebody comes in the first 12 months, for the first 24 months, or first 30 months. And that's a tiered structure, so that fee goes down with each one of those tiers at 12 months, 24 months, and 30 months.
Ken, does your department actually do the paving, or is this subbed out, or do whomever is making the cuts have the responsibility to hire somebody?
In all cases except for the City of Phoenix Water Services Department, those cuts are paid back by the utility company. When we're talking about water services, yes. No, I'm sorry, the utility company itself does take care of it. So Southwest Gas, Cox, they take care of the pavement themselves. If we're talking about City of Phoenix Water Services, the temporary pavement is done by the Water Services Department, then we'll come back and do the permanent fix afterwards. And there's some cases if there's a pavement treatment that's going to be coming up on that roadway or something like that, where there will be an agreement between the utility company and the City of Phoenix that they'll pay for a portion of that treatment that they would have otherwise had to do, and so we'll do the pavement treatment at our normal schedule after that's been completed.
And Madam Chair, just to add also, if it's a larger water leak, like it was a massive line, we'll work with Water Services, and they actually will get a bigger, a contractor, a private contractor to deal with the bigger types of situations that they might encounter.
Vice Mayor?
We have pavement at 1 year, 2 years, and then 30 months. 30 months seems like it's a little bit of a different time frame than our peer cities. Why 30 months?
And we'll get into that and by the next slide, but Vice Mayor. But the point is, I think the we wrap the kind of the bow around that is our last ordinance changes related to this were in 1987, and so that's kind of why we're talking to you today about this and to see what kind of direction we might be able to go forward and moving forward on this. And we do get revenues, obviously, from those surcharge fees because each one of those utility companies make a decision whether they're going to pay the surcharge fees or wait on that project. If it needs to be done, then they'll pay the surcharge fees. But about $150,000 was what's collected by the city for surcharge fees in 2015. So right to the Vice Mayor's point, if you look at a chart, we did some analysis of what the different cities around us are doing and have been doing and related to this same issue. And the three things I'd probably point out to you, one is if you look at just a surcharge fee duration, and this chart shows you the duration of the surcharge fees for each one of our neighboring cities. Ours at 30 months is when our surcharge fees ends. We are the shortest duration of surcharge fees. The rest of them typically are running between 3 to 7 years, with Tempe being the longest at 7 years and Peoria being at 3 years. Now, the next thing is that if you look at the fee calculation, if you look at the previous slide real quick here, that you had a calculation here for how many linear feet a trench and what is the cost for that. If you look at just those set fees, Phoenix is the third lowest of these different cities as far as the fee we charge per square foot when it comes to the surcharge fees. And then thirdly, the two stars that you see up there, Mesa and Chandler, they also include for the first year, if you disturb pavement that's been treated in the first year, you come back with a mill and overlay treatment. That's part of the utility requirement. So if they do a pavement cut there, they have to do a mill and overlay, which is a more, as you saw in Ruben's presentation earlier, it's a much more robust treatment, much more complete treatment. So that is something we don't have currently as a mill and overlay requirement with a utility cut of any length of time after we've hit it, after we've gone and treated it.
What's Glendale like? Do they have it? I mean, they're not on this list, but
I think Glendale, if I remember right, is exactly like Chandler's. I mean, is that right?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Glendale's currently does not have an ordinance, but according to their staff, they adhere to what Chandler has in place. So they don't have a specific ordinance already, but follow the requirements per Chandler.
thank you.
So with that in mind, obviously we would frame, just like as Mario mentioned, whatever we might do or could do. It doesn't happen without our stakeholders, our utility partners. We're in this together. They need our right of way. We need them to use our right of way. So we need to be able to partner together in whatever we do. But some potential things we might want to look at, as I mentioned earlier, since this ordinance has not been updated since 1987, there's an opportunity to be able to potentially look at this. Some things we might want to look at is the duration of the surcharge fees. Do we extend it beyond 30 months to something more in line with what the rest of the cities are doing? Do we look at our surcharge fees? Do we increase them? And do we include a mill and overlay requirement as well to protect that investment? The one thing I've kind of realized is working in streets is when you talk to people in the public, whether it's a year or 2 years, they remember when their street was overlaid or when their street was treated. So, they may say, it was just treated, and it could have been 2 years ago, but in their mind, in the mind of this street is perfect the way it is right now, and somebody came in and did something, whatever the reason may be, emergency or other wise, but that's in their mindset. They want to make sure that we're doing our best to protect the investment. So that's kind of why we're here today, is really to kind of kick off this discussion and to bring it in front of you and let you know what we're doing today and potential options. Nothing has been decided. We want to be able to see what kind of path we might want to lead forward in dealing with this issue. That concludes our presentation.
I've asked the question when we were reviewing this in my office, the inspection process. When the overlay is completed, or they patched it, let me put it that way, does the city go out and inspect it immediately? Is there a follow-up inspection to make sure that it's quality and it lasts?
Madam Chair, as far as dry utilities go, there is an inspection process that is done throughout the entire time that they're working. And we do go back after they are required to do a micro seal treatment and or a slurry seal treatment per the MAC spec. So there is an inspection that's done prior to that, make sure they're raising all the manholes and so forth. And so
There is an inspection on that end. It's a little bit different on the water services end. For water services, because they're only making the repair, they're backfilling, and then they're putting a temporary patch. At that point, we're notified to go out and test for compaction, and then we come through and send that on to our street maintenance folks who come back and make the permanent repair. In terms of do we come back 6 months later to kind of say, hey, is it settling? Are we having any issues? We don't currently perform inspection services like that. But that's definitely something that we could take a look at and evaluate if we need to provide those services.
Actually, I'd like to see when you bring this back to us with recommendations, that something along that line is included, because I can think of one just down the street from me. Initially, perfect, and now we have a dip.
Okay.
And I just think if you're going to have them do it, then there has to be a responsibility that it's better than what was put in. So, anyone?
Sure, if I could just add a little bit to that. I mean, that's a great question, and it's an area I think that we can make some improvements. So in addition to the inspections, just kind of looking at our training, our current practices and training for the staff that are doing those fills and patches. And then also looking at our specifications and requirements to see whether there's any changes that might need to be made there to enhance those and make sure that those specifications and requirements that we have in place are the right ones to prevent any future dip down of that patch. So all of those things will be looked at.
Councilman?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate you bringing this issue to the subcommittee. I think it's a very good discussion for us to have. Obviously, something we hear about a lot. I won't be around for when this comes back to the subcommittee and then on to the full council, but what I'd like to see anyway is less of an emphasis on imposing more costs on the utilities, because we know those are just going to get passed on to the ratepayers most likely, and instead more of a focus on how can we coordinate better our efforts between the city and with the utilities, and so to avoid, the duplicative efforts. That would be my general comment on it. But again, I think it's a very, very good one. As 19th Avenue has had a lot of work on it recently in our district, and it's going to have more. Actually, the water department, it has a sewer project that's going to be happening in the future. So, to the extent that we can do more silo busting, more coordinating in our efforts, it will be greatly appreciated by our residents.
Did you have a question? Vice Mayor?
So we do have some good news. We certainly have more above-ground utilities than many communities, and so that does help with some disruptions. And we do have some successes in coordinating when we're doing particularly the larger street projects. So do you have any good stories of successes where we've been able to coordinate, and when the city was doing a project, maybe worked with the private sector to get upgrades or?
Madam Chair and Madam Chair and Vice Mayor, we do have instances where we've worked with ADOT, with the utility companies, where we go in and do a vault, for example, where we could do. I don't have a specific project or corridor, but we do work with like APS, all of these major utility companies, where if we're doing a roadway through the Sonoran Preserves up north, we work with them to try to see how we can define that utility corridor so we don't put it in conflict with a pavement roadway that might go along that corridor. So we do have instances where we've done that, especially with ADOT, where they're providing infrastructure within either the freeways or within close proximity of our streets, where we try to work with them when they're developing their connections to the traffic interchanges, that we work with them to make sure that we're not impacting the roadways. As well as storm drainage. I mean, there's a significant storm drainage for the I-10 Deck Park Tunnel, where we've worked with them, with ADOT, to make sure that we have the roadway and how some of these tunnels, the drainage tunnels, are being, basically they go south to the Salt River, and how they are coordinated through our streets. So we've done that in the past. It is sometimes it's hard because you're trying to coordinate our CIP, our capital improvement program, with their types of projects, as well as our CIP projects with internal other departments, with the water department, or it could be instances where there could be some synergy to coordinate and have a both water and streets project at one time. We're actually doing, now that I've I thought about
thinking
it.
Broadway Road.
Broadway Road, we're doing a sewer IDs, sewer improvement districts along that whole corridor prior to the final roadway that goes in there. So that's another way to kind of collaborate with the need for the community, but as well as, providing a coordinated effort with the roadway.
Fabulous, because no one calls our office to say, thank you for doing it at the same time. They definitely call when they're like,
After the fact, yeah.
how could you just did this? And could you, but there are, even if
Yes.
it's not as visible that two things are happening at
Yes.
once, that we are.
Vice Mayor, the one thing I'd probably add on to that too, as well as mentioned in the report, is we recently started meeting on a quarterly basis with some of the management level staff with APS, between management level staff at City of Phoenix and APS. Brianna's group at the staff level works with all the utility companies and does coordination there, but I think it's sometimes good to have that second layer of meetings going on. And so we've seen some success out of meeting with APS, and that's something we would, as we mentioned in the report, we're trying to coordinate with some of the other utility providers as well to see if we can have that same level meeting to make sure we're all talking the same at all levels of our organization.
I have a card from Reed Butler. Would you like to come up, please?
Thank you, Chair Williams, and members of your committee. Reed Butler, 42 West Mariposa Street, Butler Housing Company. So this is one of my favorite topics, pavement cuts, right? I've been cutting pavements for decades. I think I cut my first street, yeah, that's right, in the 80s, and we cut Thunderbird twice in the 90s at Metro North, at
Okay.
14th Street.
Did you send
I'm
the
not
bill
sure
to
about
him?
District 8 cuts. I'm still working on that, but I do have a success story in District 4. 7th Avenue, we had to do a utility relocation at 7th Avenue in Highland Metro Affordable Housing Project in 2013. And we were going to cut 7th Avenue, right, just south of Camelback, which is a heavily trafficked arterial, so that's part of what happens when you cut these. But your housing department, Jerome Miller, Kim Dorney back then, and Ray Dovalina and Wiley Burrup said, hang on, we're getting ready to repave 7th Avenue, so why don't you go do your cut before we repave? This is such a simple thing. This was such a simple discussion, but that kind of simple coordination saved us a bunch of money, about $50,000 or more on an affordable housing project, and it avoided a problem where the city might have paved, we would have been ignorant, the city might have paved, and we would have wanted to come cut right after it was paved. So there are this word coordination, which I heard Ray talk about, Councilman Gates, I heard you talk about, others on the committee. The coordination is really important. So the reason I'm here, staff is coming to meet with the apartment development industry on June 6th to have a discussion. We're not a big part of the curb cuts or the pavement cuts. I think you said 3%, Keeney, a couple hundred, but that's our urban infill, which everybody is encouraging, but every time you have an urban infill apartment project, Alan, as you know, we're cutting the streets. I mean, that's just what ends up happening. So we look forward to planning and coordination. This is the first time in decades that this has ever really happened in an organized way. So I'm here to say thank you to you and to your staff. And my only caution, back in the 80s and 90s, occasionally there was a discussion about a moratorium on street cuts. Moratoriums are kind of a scary thing. So to me, if we can find a way to put the moratorium back in the box and do better coordination, plan together, and then do these projects hand in hand, then I think we end up with a better result for everybody. We all save money, and the streets don't have to be cut multiple times. So thank you very much to you and to your staff for this planning and coordination effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
And I don't think anyone's been talking about a moratorium at all, but it does seem like the more we can have, like in the planning department newsletter, how do you find the list of what street projects the city is doing, and just making sure the data is available so that we can look for win-wins and people in the private sector can see what we're already doing, and we can avoid a few of those cuts, which it sounds like is in everyone's best interest.
Yes.
Councilwoman Pastor, do you have any comments or questions?
I do. Thank you for doing this. One of the questions that I have, and Ray, it may land in a different area, is because in District 4, there are cuts happening right now. And what's happening because the infrastructure is so old, any disruption to the infrastructure is then causing a domino effect, i.e. irrigation lines, issues like that. And so how do we coordinate and figure those pieces out when cuts are happening to the streets?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, I think that's a great point. As we experienced it was a couple of weeks ago, we talked about a private line. There's actually private lines that are irrigation lines that go through our streets that we need to somehow coordinate those. It might not be SRP's area or point of distribution. It's basically beyond SRP's operations and maintenance. So how do we deal with that? And I think to Kenny's point is we're gonna have to talk about that with SRP and potentially all of the water. They're called irrigation water districts. So there's tons of them all over the city, and so that's another discussion that we need to have, because there's actually private lines that we don't maintain and operate. It's basically the water district of that HOA or neighborhood or whatever that needs to maintain those lines. So we're having to see how do we deal with that, because a lot of that infrastructure is very, very, very old. And so I think it's another piece of all of the things that we need to coordinate, and how do we deal with that and communicate with the neighborhoods and the residents out there.
Do you have any other questions?
That's it.
Do we have records of things like that in our right-of-way? I mean, do we know actually what's there and where it's at?
Madam Chair, with regards to the irrigation water districts, we do have about 10 years ago, we had this issue that there was a lot of lines that were in disrepair. Not a lot of them. Some of the lines, some of the areas were not. There wasn't a water district. So there's a process where it's actually the county does the water district formation, but they have to go through, if they're incorporated areas like the city of Phoenix, they have to get a resolution through the city council, and then that entity goes to the county, and then they form a water district. So to this point, we do have identified a lot of the water districts. The challenge that we have is the ones that are not water districts, and there's all these lines out there that are either being used and there's no formation of a district, or there's lines that don't have any water, that there's no more water going through them. And that's another issue when we start, doing a roadway or moving around the dirt with regards to other repairs or whatever, or construction, then those hollowed pipes could pose a problem, and then it kind of creates sort of a domino effect of trying to catch that
Right.
pipe or that caved in pipe that's out there. So we do have what we do know, but always there's probably going to be stuff that we don't know that's out there.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we thank you very much and look forward to you bringing this back. It definitely needs an update. Next is call to the public. No cards. Next is thank you to Councilman Gates for serving on this committee, to always be in tune, even going out and writing and checking out the streets personally. I have enjoyed very much working with you on this, and I know we have common lines, district lines, so I have worked a lot with your constituents, and thank you for working with mine, because we have a lot of common goals, but it had truly been a joy, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you for your leadership of this committee. There's nobody else who could be this chair. I mean, you have just provided incredible service and incredible knowledge and a steady hand to this subcommittee over the years, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be the token male on this subcommittee.
Infrastructure, just a woman's world.
Exactly. No,
I didn't think you realized it.
I did. I wanted to just a couple other things. First of all, Mario, thanks for stepping in here. You've done a great job leading this subcommittee. It's been great because when I came on the council, you were the city clerk, and you were there as I became a councilman. And thank you. It's been great to see your growth within the team here, and I know there's many great things you'll do in the future. And to everyone that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years, I also wanted to say that water is been a great piece of being on this subcommittee. Catherine and your team have provided incredible innovative leadership, and it's been a real joy. And Karen Peters, for your leadership. I am so proud of the work that Phoenix Water has done and really is a leader moving forward. But having said all that, I believe that this is the most important subcommittee as we move into the future, and that's because of not only water, but also because of T2050 and how the city spends the money over the next 30 years is the #1 issue, I think. And I know that this group will make sure that it's spent wisely, and we make sure that the streets get the money that they need. And so that was very appropriate that we had a long discussion. We know light rail is going to get the support that it needs, and there'll be great projects there, but it's really important that we don't forget the streets. And this group is going to play a large part in how light rail moves finally into District 3. So you may be hearing from me on that, but I know that that's going to be a great addition. And finally, Vice Mayor, look forward to your great leadership in the future. Your leadership you've already shown, but into the future on this subcommittee and others. So thank you very much. It's been a joy and a pleasure to work with you all.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you to Councilman Gates for making sure we do a good job building Phoenix and making sure we invest in technology and do it as efficiently as possible. I think when we finally get the app to pay for the light rail and bus system on our phone, maybe we should call it the Gateway or something so that we can name it after Councilman Gates, because we will be thinking of you when we.
Thank you. That's
Go
a much
digital.
better name than they suggested in the Innovation Subcommittee. So people can
Uh-oh.
pull that one up on YouTube if they want to know what I'm talking
Big
about.
gas?
Yes.
Oh.
I thought that was pretty cool, actually. Recycling. Councilwoman Pastor, any comments?
Thank you, Councilman Gates. I really appreciate all your good work and the fact that when I came on council that you welcomed me and guided me in certain situations where I had some questions or wanted to know how to maneuver. So thank you for your leadership.
Oh, and I'm so sorry because you're not here. I didn't mention you. Councilwoman Pastor, it's been a joy working with you, and in particular on the strategic plan issue. And so it's only fitting that that's going to be my last meeting as a member of the council will be the strategic planning meeting we have later this afternoon. So it's been great working with you. Thanks so much, and I look forward to many great things out of you in the future as well.
Thank you.
You ever notice when someone's on the phone and we're talking to them, we all look up? I guess because the voice comes out of the ceiling, so, yeah. Any future items that you would like to see us put on, other than what's on our list? Okay, hearing none, we are adjourned.